after a while, we ran out of wooden blades and had to switch into the real ones.
Richard, what was your favorite memory or experience from working on that film?
Probably, aside from obviously what Aid's saying, working with friends is getting a chance to work with people like Obata Sensei, Toshishiro Obata. I can't remember when China O'Brien was released, but he was in China O'Brien. We worked together. And that's probably after I didn't even look up the dates of release of these films. But anyway, for those who don't know, Obata Sensei, he was the founder of Shinkendo, which is an organization, federation that was dedicated to honoring, what can we say, the samurai combatives, especially when it comes to sword, not just merely the demonstrative aspects, but the real aspects of sword on the battlefield. So you're dealing with somebody that was a real master at what he did. Obata Sensei also, the people I know, he was already doing choreography and working and training actors in Japan before he came out to America. And he also studied acting, which I didn't know at the time. So cut to, we go to this movie, and Obata was a natural one to have in this film as the main antagonist because I knew his ability to put a fight scene together with sword
Mhm.
would be so important. Because again, as you know, David, back then, this is before the John Wicks and a certain style of martial art as the way it was depicted on film became the vogue. In other words, things got tricked up a lot more. We were very interested in at least whatever the fights were to have them kind of remain pretty true to traditionalism, and when it came to the katana and using the sword, it was important that it wasn't just twirling swords around and being all flash. And meeting Obata, you realize that would never have happened because he's so true to the spirit of what he did that he, at least then, I know he did. For those who know, he worked in Mutant Ninja Turtles, as a character. But that being a given, as far as our film, we wanted to be very real. I ended up training with Obata Sensei at his dojo in Los Angeles because the opening scene, as you remember, involved tamashigiri, which is, test cutting the straw. And that was something that I wasn't well versed in at all. So I spent quite a bit of time with him, learning all aspects of sword, at least for the short amount of time I had. And that still is priceless for me to get to work with somebody of his caliber, in such a traditional art, that he was well versed in is secondary to none. So that was great. He put the fight scenes together in the movie, again using sword. And we could go into stories, but one of the thrills of doing that fight scene you see is that we ran out of bamboo swords, halfway through. So we ended up doing most of the end part of that sword with live blades, with
Oh,
actual live katana, which is, when you think about it, could be and should be quite scary. But he trusted me, and I, of course, trusted him. And again, it was okay because the idea of the sword, the way Obata wanted it displayed, was there's not a lot of clacking of swords. You see a lot of swords, which they would never do. It would destroy your blade, if not break it. So it was quite important to him that it was reasonably authentic, albeit given it's a movie, we have to entertain. But working with him on those aspects is something I remember vividly. And that opening scene, which we did later in the movie of the tamashigiri or the straw cutting on the beach, became probably one of the scariest things for me because it became so important that I would represent Obata the
mm.
correct way when performing that. I didn't want it to be a little bit hokey and not quite on. And Aid remembers, we spent a lot of time on boats in the middle of the bloody water, around islands of Thailand and beating sun. I said, Aid, I cannot do this later in the day. If we're going to do this, I have to do it early in the day when I'm fit and strong and everything else and not depleted. I think it still ended up, we did it later in the day. And all I remember when we're doing the test cutting is I'm getting ready to, cut, and all I hear is Obata in the background, and he's yelling, "You must katu, you must katu." He's always about this positive sort of warrior mentality and combat mindset, then and making me realize that there was no other way than to cut the straw. And yeah, they're just the little bits like that I just remember vividly, and fond memories. And you'll notice, by the way, we were going to talk about this in the fight. Obata cuts some bamboo that's in a pot. I mean, that was real, and that could have been close to being even a world record with one of the cuts that you actually see in the fight performed by Obata with a live blade. Um, so, little memories like that are very special for me when looking back on the shooting of that fight scene.
Yeah, for
Following
sure.
up on Richard's comments about Obata and the traditionalism, uh, when when I first met him on set, because there was no introduction rehearsals, these low budget films, you don't get that luxury.
Hmm.
And when we met, he said, "You want Hollywood fight or traditional fight?" And I said, "A traditional sword fight would be the way to go." That's what I felt. So that's what he choreographed, and we were switching tinfoil coated wooden blades out for a lot of the wider shots, or when they clashed. Um, and like Rich said, after a while we ran out of wooden blades and had to switch into the real ones. And there are a few hero shots where I think we used Obata's own sword for the close-ups of the blades, particularly when Richard draws it out and it comes into close-up in the foreground. There's just something about seeing a real blade like that our fake tourist sword that we were using paled. I mean, it's just like no comparison whatsoever to seeing a real
Well,
blade like that. And then Richard
it,
had the
sorry,
inspection
when
of the blade. Yeah.
you did that cut through the two bamboo that is taken apart, even he said to me, "Make sure you stand back." I said, "Absolutely, Sensei. You don't have to tell me twice."
But he
Because,
went out and he meditated for like 5 minutes away from set to come in and do this specific
Sure.
shot. It was like extraordinary when it happened.
Yeah, I mean, I love this kind of insight and background into the film because, when you watch it, you appreciate it that much more. So when this came out, for example, in 1990, this was before the internet, this was before the UFC, this was before a lot of stuff. And, a big reason why a lot of us watched martial art movies back then is because that's how you would get exposure to martial arts. So, regardless of what Richard was doing, and based on what he said, he was doing some very legit stuff, cutting the bamboo, and was taught by the master. If you're just watching the movie, you would just assume this guy knows what he's doing, and it's good to confirm that for real, because again, you watch the movie back then, you're like, you just assume because there's no other frame of reference, right? Unless you're, training swords. I mean, I don't know who did that back then. I mean, they had taekwondo classes where I grew up, and I started with judo as well on an army base, funny enough. But whatever I seen in movies, back then, I'm like, that's just the way it's done.
Well,
Not
in
thinking
that,
of like how Hollywood over, dramatizes things and stuff. But
one of the things that we were on that particular the bamboo cutting, there was one shot that we did in slow motion, and it's no cuts, no pun intended. But there are no film cuts that Richard actually does the three cuts in one motion. And that was the one I think I'm most proud of, and I think Rich is too. It all happens in the one shot. There are when he cuts the other pieces, but there's one that he does at the end, and it's just like the three cuts, and they're so smooth. That's when you know when you're seeing this character, he knows what he's doing, and having that right up front in the movie lends a credibility to what's going to ensue down the track.
Well, and again, I want to emphasize that to have somebody like Obata Sensei, who's the real deal, I think he was 7 years like world or Japanese champion, Tamashigiri cutting.
Wow.
He set a world record with, kabuto wari, they call it, which is helmet splitting, where they put a Japanese military helmet and he gets the katana and they cut in, and he cut the deepest apparently since some 17th century warrior, samurai warrior. I mean, meaning that what he was doing is it's absolute, it's the real deal, and again, you asked me about the biggest thrill. I mean, how many times do you get to work alongside real artists like that are at the best at what they do? And of course, he's an aikido master as well, so yeah, it this is the thing I always say to people about what I do in movies. It's so great that it's not just making a movie, but you actually learn life skills. You enrich your own passion for whatever it is you do. And in my case, sort of martial arts. And you get to work with Benny Urquidez and Chuck Norris and Joe Lewis and Bong Soo-han and Bill Wallace, and on it goes. And you think, wow, I mean, life couldn't be much better than that. So, yeah, fantastic memories.